Hey guys, tonight we begin in the warm blue water near the islands of the Bahamas. So dim the lights a little, get comfortable, maybe grab a blanket that has been sitting on a chair for 3 days because apparently that is where blankets live now. And together, we're going to slowly drift into one of the strangest underwater mysteries ever attached to the word Atlantis. Tonight's story is about the Bimini Road, a long line of giant underwater stones resting quietly beneath shallow Caribbean water. Stones that have inspired archaeologists, psychics, divers, conspiracy theorists, exhausted historians, and at least one man who definitely owned too many crystal necklaces in the 1970s. And honestly, the rocks themselves are surprisingly calm about all this. The Bimini Road does not roar. It does not glow mysteriously in the moonlight. It does not summon ancient powers. It mostly just sits there underwater while humans aggressively project emotional needs onto it, which is, when you think about it, a deeply human tradition. The story begins near North Bimini Island in the Bahamas, a place with turquoise water so clear that modern tourists immediately start making life plans they cannot financially support. Little boats drift over coral reefs. Fish move lazily through sunlight. Everything looks peaceful enough to heal emotional damage from answering emails. And beneath that calm water rests a formation of large limestone blocks. Long, straightish, and suspiciously organized. At least suspiciously organized if you are a human being who desperately wants ancient mysteries to be true. The stones form a line stretching roughly half a mile beneath shallow water. Some of the blocks are rectangular. Some appear fitted together. Others seem oddly placed, almost like paving stones from some forgotten structure. And once people saw them, well, things escalated immediately. Because humans cannot see a pile of unusual rocks without inventing either a lost civilization or a curse. Sometimes both. Now, technically, the Bimini Road was officially discovered in 1968 by a group of divers flying over the area. They spotted the formation beneath the water and descended to investigate. What they found looked unusual enough to ignite decades of debate. But the weirdness actually started before that. Because years earlier, the famous psychic Edgar Cayce had made one of his many predictions. Edgar Cayce, if you are unfamiliar, was an American mystic who entered trance-like states and delivered strange prophecies while sounding deeply sleepy himself, which honestly makes him spiritually qualified for tonight's episode. Cayce claimed that remnants of Atlantis would rise near Bimini in the late 1960s. And then, incredibly, strange underwater stones were discovered near Bimini in 1968. Which was either an astonishing coincidence or the single greatest day in Atlantis fandom history. Naturally, people lost their minds. Books were written almost immediately. Documentaries appeared. Divers arrived from everywhere. Atlantis enthusiasts began emotionally attaching themselves to underwater limestone with the intensity of medieval pilgrims discovering a suspiciously shaped potato. Because Atlantis is one of those ideas humanity refuses to let go of. Plato first described Atlantis over 2,000 years ago. According to his account, it was a wealthy and advanced island civilization that eventually became corrupt and sank beneath the sea. And humanity heard the story and collectively decided, yes, we would like that to be real forever. Atlantis became the historical equivalent of glitter. It gets everywhere and never fully disappears. Every few decades, someone claims to have found it again. under the Mediterranean, under Antarctica, inside the Bermuda Triangle, possibly under Gary's Bait Shop, and now near Bimini. The timing seemed too perfect for believers to ignore. Edgar Cayce had predicted ruins. Ruins appeared. Case closed. Except archaeologists and geologists arrived and immediately ruined the mood by using science, which, to be fair, is often their role in history. Entire careers have been built around quietly entering exciting situations and saying, "Actually, no." Geologists studied the stones and concluded they were likely natural beach rock formations. Beach rock forms when sand and sediment harden over time through natural geological processes. Waves, tides, erosion, pressure, and time can create formations that appear strangely artificial. Nature, unfortunately for conspiracy theorists, is very good at making weird shapes, especially rocks. Rocks are constantly out there looking suspicious. And the Bimini stones, according to most mainstream researchers, fit natural geological patterns found elsewhere in the Bahamas. But believers were unconvinced, because some stones appeared too symmetrical, too deliberate, too neatly aligned. And honestly, humans are deeply vulnerable to straight lines. If we see anything resembling organization, we immediately assume civilization. A row of stones? Ancient architects. A circle of stones? Ancient ritual. A triangle? Aliens probably. Our brains are extremely eager little detectives. And to be fair, the Bimini Road really does look unusual in photographs, especially from above. The blocks appear arranged almost like an ancient road or seawall. Some researchers even suggested there were multiple layers beneath the visible stones, as though hidden structures remained buried underneath. Now enter the divers. And this is where the story becomes wonderfully sleepy in the strangest possible way. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, divers became obsessed with Bimini. They descended into shallow water carrying cameras, measuring equipment, notebooks, and occasionally enough spiritual energy to power a small moon cult. Some claimed to see roads. Others saw walls. A few confidently identified harbor systems. One man reportedly believed crystals beneath the ocean floor were emitting ancient energy fields. Because of course he did. This was the era when people thought Atlantis might also heal your chakras. Meanwhile, marine life calmly swam around the stones, completely uninterested in human emotional collapse. Fish truly have the healthiest relationship with history. They never care. You could place a fish inside the ruins of Pompeii, and it would simply continue being a fish. No theories. No podcasts. No 12-part documentary narrated by a British man whispering the word mystery every 6 minutes. Just fish activities. But humans needed answers. And more importantly, humans wanted Atlantis to feel possible. Because Atlantis is not really about archaeology. Not entirely. It is about longing. Atlantis represents the fantasy that somewhere, somehow, humanity was once greater than it is now. Wiser. More advanced. More magical. Less likely to spend 4 hours arguing online about sandwich opinions. People want hidden civilizations because modern life often feels spiritually exhausting. So the idea of a lost world beneath the sea becomes comforting, mysterious, romantic, even if the evidence is mostly underwater rocks behaving like rocks. Still, the Bimini Road refused to disappear from public imagination. Television specials loved it, especially late-night documentaries with dramatic music and terrifying amounts of fog for absolutely no reason. They would show underwater footage while a narrator asked things like, "Could this be evidence of a forgotten civilization?" And then immediately cut to a man named Trevor standing beside a pyramid poster saying absolutely yes. Trevor always believed. Meanwhile, exhausted marine geologists sat nearby trying not to sigh themselves into another dimension. And honestly, both sides became a little dramatic over time. Some Atlantis believers insisted mainstream archaeology was hiding the truth, which is funny because archaeology is already a profession made up largely of tired people brushing dirt off pottery fragments in extreme heat. It is difficult to imagine them coordinating a global conspiracy while also losing tiny bone fragments in the sand. On the other hand, some skeptics became almost aggressively determined to destroy every ounce of mystery. You could show them a glowing underwater temple tomorrow, and they would probably say, yes. Natural limestone disappointment. History people can become deeply stubborn, but the Bahamas themselves continued quietly existing around the debate. Warm wind, palm trees, salt air. Tourists drinking colorful beverages with names like Tropical Shipwreck Explosion. And just beneath the waves, the stones remained. Silent, patient, almost amused. Now, one of the strangest things about the Bimini Road is how emotionally attached people became to its meaning. Because once Atlantis enters a conversation, objectivity immediately packs its bags and leaves the building. People began linking the stones to ancient Egypt, then to extraterrestrials, then to mysterious energy grids, then to the lost wisdom of forgotten civilizations that apparently knew how to harness cosmic vibrations, but somehow still vanished completely, which is always an awkward detail. Ancient super-civilizations in these stories are usually described as possessing impossible technology, spiritual enlightenment, and universal knowledge. Yet they somehow lose a fight against weather. A difficult brand inconsistency. Still, underwater discoveries kept fueling speculation. Divers occasionally found additional stone formations nearby. Some looked like circles. Others resembled foundations. Every discovery generated another wave of theories. And every theory somehow became more dramatic than the last. At one point, people genuinely suggested the Bahamas were part of a vast submerged continent connected to Atlantis itself, which is a bold conclusion to reach while staring at rocks underwater in swim fins. But humanity has always loved giant explanations. Small truths disappoint us. Natural erosion simply cannot compete with ancient psychic ocean empire. One sounds like geology homework. The other sounds like a prog rock album from 1974. And this brings us gently into one of history's favorite habits, turning uncertainty into mythology. Because the Bimini Road is far from unique. Humans have always transformed mysterious landscapes into stories. Ancient ruins become cursed cities. Odd mountains become sleeping giants. Unusual caves become entrances to the underworld. We look at strange things and instinctively create narratives around them. Sometimes beautiful narratives, sometimes very silly ones, often both at once. And Atlantis may be the greatest example of this instinct ever created. A story that survived for thousands of years because it taps directly into human imagination. A perfect lost world. advanced but doomed, wise but arrogant, beautiful but tragic. Like a civilization designed entirely by someone who enjoyed dramatic endings. And honestly, Plato may never have intended Atlantis to be treated literally at all. Many scholars believe Atlantis was a philosophical allegory, a moral story about pride, corruption, and collapse. But humanity heard sunken island civilization and immediately said, "No, no. We're definitely going to spend centuries searching oceans now," which feels very on-brand for us. Still, the Bimini Road became one of the most famous Atlantis candidates in modern history. Books continue to discuss it. Tourists still visit. Divers still descend beneath the waves, hoping to glimpse evidence of lost civilizations. And underwater, the stones continue their extremely low-energy existence, not explaining anything, not confirming anything, just sitting there while humanity emotionally spirals around them for decades, which, honestly, is a very powerful form of passive communication. And the deeper we go into this story, the stranger it becomes. Because soon we encounter psychic predictions, Cold War obsessions, New Age mysticism, underwater expeditions, suspiciously enthusiastic treasure hunters, and a truly remarkable number of men in short-sleeved safari shirts explaining Atlantis with absolute confidence.
So settle in.
Adjust the pillow slightly. Maybe listen to the distant sound of imaginary Caribbean waves. And let's float gently onward into the wonderfully sleepy chaos surrounding the Bimini Road. By the early 1970s, the Bimini Road had become something far bigger than a line of underwater stones. It had become an atmosphere, a mood, a deeply specific blend of archaeology, spiritual yearning, suntans, and mild chaos. Divers arrived constantly now. Some came with legitimate scientific curiosity. Others came because they had read exactly one Atlantis paperback at an airport and decided destiny was calling. And honestly, the Bahamas probably seemed like an excellent place to experience destiny. Warm water, bright skies, gentle waves, tiny fish drifting through coral. It is difficult to feel stressed while floating over turquoise water unless you are actively being chased by a shark or trapped in a group snorkeling excursion with overly competitive retirees. The islands around Bimini had long possessed an almost mythical reputation even before Atlantis entered the picture. Sailors told stories about strange currents and disappearances. The nearby waters were eventually folded into the larger mythology of the Bermuda Triangle because apparently one mysterious ocean legend was simply not enough for the region. And once people start combining mysteries together, things escalate quickly. Soon Atlantis, psychic visions, magnetic anomalies, ancient civilizations, UFOs, and underwater pyramids were all sharing the same conversational apartment. None of them paid rent. At the center of much of this excitement remained Edgar Cayce. Now, Cayce himself had died years before the Bimini Road was discovered, which somehow made his reputation even larger. Dead mystics become very powerful because they can no longer accidentally clarify anything. Cayce had spent much of his life giving trance readings on health, spirituality, reincarnation, and ancient civilizations. During these sessions, he spoke in a sleepy, detached voice, almost like a man narrating a bedtime story while spiritually buffering, which again is ideal energy for tonight. One of his most famous claims involved Atlantis. Casey described it as a highly advanced civilization possessing strange technology and spiritual knowledge. According to him, parts of Atlantis would eventually rise again near Bimini. And then underwater stones appeared there in 1968. To believers, this was essentially psychic mic drop behavior. Books exploded onto shelves. Organizations formed around studying Atlantis. Lectures were given in hotel conference rooms with carpets patterned like geometric nightmares from another dimension. People gathered eagerly to discuss crystal power, ancient wisdom, and underwater ruins while sipping coffee from tiny styrofoam cups. Humanity truly processes existential mystery in the least glamorous environments imaginable. Now, among the researchers investigating Bimini were actual marine geologists trying very hard to remain calm. And you have to admire them. Because imagine spending years studying sediment formation only to have someone in sandals explain that psychic laser crystals built Atlantis 12,000 years ago. At some point, you simply stare into the ocean and reconsider your career. Geologists examined the stones carefully. Many concluded that the blocks were examples of naturally fractured beach rock. Beach rock forms in coastal areas where carbonate sediment hardens over time. Later erosion can break these hardened sections into rectangular shapes, which sounds disappointingly reasonable. And nature genuinely does create patterns that look artificial. Columns of basalt can resemble giant architecture. Crystal formations can appear carved. Caves can look designed. The Earth occasionally behaves like an artist with excellent geometry skills and too much free time. Still, critics of the natural explanation pointed to several details they considered suspicious. Some stones appeared stacked. Others seemed aligned at unusual angles. A few researchers claimed tool marks existed on certain blocks. And suddenly the arguments became wonderfully endless. Scientists debated measurements. Divers debated photographs. Atlantis enthusiasts debated absolutely everything. Meanwhile, the stones themselves continued resting underwater with extraordinary emotional detachment. Now, one thing that made Bimini particularly compelling was accessibility. Unlike many alleged lost civilizations hidden beneath deep oceans or dense jungles, the Bimini Road sat in relatively shallow water. Divers could actually visit it without needing futuristic submarines or billionaire funding, which meant ordinary people could swim above Atlantis before lunch and still make it back to the hotel buffet by evening. This democratized mystery in a very modern way. And tourism responded immediately. Local businesses leaned into the legend because of course they did. If mysterious underwater ruins suddenly appeared near your island, you would absolutely start selling Atlantis-themed souvenirs. There is no moral superiority in pretending otherwise. Some shops sold books on Atlantis. Others offered diving excursions. A few places developed entire mystical reputations around supposed energy zones. By the late 1970s, Bimini had become a pilgrimage site for dreamers. And dreamers are fascinating historical creatures, because they often want mystery to remain unresolved. A solved mystery loses emotional magic. If tomorrow someone proved beyond doubt that the Bimini Road was either definitely Atlantis or definitely natural rock, a certain kind of enchantment would vanish either way. The uncertainty itself is part of the appeal. Human beings love standing at the edge of possibility, especially when that possibility involves ancient lost civilizations instead of tax paperwork. Now, Let's gently float over to another royal disaster of human behavior. The absolute certainty people develop after reading 2 books. Atlantis researchers became deeply divided into camps. There were believers, skeptics, moderate theorists, alternative archaeologists, mystics, treasure hunters, and at least several men who looked permanently sunburned and referred to themselves as independent researchers while carrying notebooks full of alarming diagrams. Everyone had theories. Some claimed Atlantis was technologically advanced beyond modern civilization. Others believed it possessed spiritual energy systems. A few suggested extraterrestrials helped build it because apparently ancient humans are never allowed to accomplish anything strange on their own in these theories. Aliens are constantly being dragged into historical conversations they did not ask for, and the proposed timelines became increasingly ambitious. Some argued Atlantis existed over 10,000 years ago. Others pushed it even further back. At a certain point, Atlantis stopped being archaeology and became emotional fan fiction for civilization itself. Still, underwater expeditions continued. Researchers mapped the stones carefully. Core samples were taken. Geological studies multiplied. Some reports suggested the formations dated naturally to periods when sea levels were lower, which complicated things. Because during the last ice age, sea levels really were dramatically different. Areas now underwater were once dry land, and this allowed mystery to creep back in through the side door. Could ancient people have used these formations somehow? Could natural structures later become modified by humans? Could there be traces of settlements nearby? The answer to most of these questions remained frustratingly uncertain, and uncertainty is extremely fertile ground for speculation, especially sleepy speculation. The kind whispered late at night over documentary music while waves roll gently in the background. Now, one particularly entertaining feature of Atlantis culture is the confidence level. People discussing Atlantis almost always sound incredibly certain, even when evidence is extremely thin. A man will stand beside blurry underwater footage and calmly announce, "This proves the existence of advanced pre-ice age civilizations. Sir, those are rocks viewed through 30 feet of moving water. Please emotionally regroup." But certainty feels comforting, especially about giant mysteries. History itself is often messy, fragmented, and incomplete. We rarely know everything. Records vanish. Structures collapse. Stories change over centuries. Yet humans desperately crave neat conclusions, which is probably why Atlantis remains so attractive. It offers the fantasy that somewhere beneath chaos lies a hidden explanation connecting everything together. A lost key to history. A secret civilization. A grand forgotten truth. Instead of the more realistic answer, which is usually, people were confused for thousands of years and did their best. Now, during all this excitement, actual Bahamian history sometimes became overshadowed, which is unfortunate because the Bahamas themselves possess rich and fascinating cultural histories independent of Atlantis tourism. The islands experienced indigenous Lucayan cultures, European colonization, piracy, slavery, migration, and centuries of survival shaped by the Atlantic world. Real human history. Complex and difficult and meaningful. But Atlantis tends to dominate conversations because mysterious sunken civilizations are apparently irresistible to television producers. And television truly loved Bimini. especially in the 1980s. Documentaries filmed divers swimming dramatically over the stones while synthesizer music hummed ominously in the background. Narrators spoke in breathy tones about ancient secrets. Everything looked vaguely damp and spiritually expensive. And every special included at least one expert staring thoughtfully into middle distance while discussing energy fields. The 1970s and 1980s were remarkable decades for this sort of thing. Western culture became deeply fascinated by mysticism, hidden wisdom, ancient astronauts, psychic powers, and forgotten civilizations. Bookstores filled with paperbacks featuring glowing pyramids on the covers. Humanity collectively went through an ancient secrets phase. Honestly, some people never left it. Meanwhile, mainstream archaeologists kept publishing careful research papers explaining sedimentation patterns while absolutely nobody invited them onto exciting television specials, which feels unfair. Imagine dedicating your life to scientific rigor only to lose airtime to a shirtless man named Falcon discussing Atlantis vibrations. History can be cruel. Still, despite all the arguments, the Bimini Road endured. Not fully proven. Not fully dismissed. Just lingering in that perfect zone between possibility and doubt. And that may be exactly why it survives in popular imagination. Because certainty ends stories. Mystery keeps them alive. Now, interestingly, not every ancient civilization story functions this way. Many archaeological discoveries eventually become accepted facts. Cities are excavated, languages deciphered, structures mapped. But Atlantis remains slippery, forever almost discovered, forever just beyond confirmation, like humanity's collective historical mirage. And Bimini became one of its most beautiful stages. Shallow blue water, sunlight rippling across stone, divers descending slowly through warm currents. It all feels cinematic even before anyone starts mentioning psychic prophecies. And perhaps that is the true power of the Bimini Road. Not that it proves Atlantis existed, but that it reveals how deeply humans want wonder. Even exhausted modern humans carrying sunscreen and underwater cameras. We still ache for mystery. We still want forgotten worlds. We still hope somewhere beneath ordinary reality lies something ancient and astonishing waiting quietly beneath the waves. Even if geology keeps gently tapping us on the shoulder saying, "My brother in Christ," those are sediment formations. And honestly, both impulses are understandable. Science wants evidence. Imagination wants meaning. The Bimini Road sits directly between those desires. Silent underwater stones becoming a mirror for human longing, which is honestly a very poetic job description for a pile of rocks. And as the years drift onward, the theories surrounding Bimini become even stranger. Because soon treasure hunters arrive. Then government interest. Then stories of underwater pyramids. And eventually, naturally, conversations involving possible alien involvement because humanity simply cannot help itself. So relax a little deeper into the pillow. Listen to the imaginary water moving gently against distant shores. And let's continue drifting through the remarkably sleepy madness surrounding the Bimini Road. By the 1980s, the Bimini Road had fully evolved from an underwater curiosity into an international mystery industry. Not just a mystery, an industry. And humanity truly loves turning uncertainty into merchandise. Books multiplied rapidly now. Entire shelves became dedicated to Atlantis theories. Some covers featured glowing temples beneath the ocean. Others showed mysterious beams of light shooting from pyramids directly into space, because apparently Atlantis could never simply be normal. It always had to be dramatically extra. And the Bahamas became one of the central stages for this growing mythology. Divers continued arriving from around the world.
Some were scientists. Some were hobbyists.
Some looked like they had wandered directly out of a 1978 progressive rock album cover. The line between archaeology and spiritual retreat became increasingly blurry. And honestly, the atmosphere around Bimini during this period sounds oddly relaxing. Imagine warm ocean air drifting across docks at sunset, boats rocking gently in the harbor, divers discussing Atlantis over seafood dinners while someone nearby explains cosmic energy with absolute confidence. A very specific vacation energy. Now, one major reason interest intensified was the possibility that the Bimini Road might only be the beginning. Because once humans decide a mystery exists, they immediately start expanding it. Suddenly people claimed there were walls nearby, then platforms, then giant underwater chambers, and eventually, naturally, pyramids. Atlantis researchers absolutely love pyramids. If someone discovers an oddly shaped hill tomorrow, at least 3 people will immediately claim it is an ancient pyramid connected to cosmic knowledge. Humanity sees triangles and emotionally loses composure. Now, to be fair, underwater formations near Bimini did sometimes appear unusual in sonar scans and blurry photographs. Certain structures seemed geometric enough to trigger speculation. But underwater visibility can be deceptive. Light bends strangely beneath water. Shadows distort shapes. Coral growth changes appearances. And humans are already deeply talented at convincing themselves they see meaningful patterns. Our brains are essentially conspiracy machines with anxiety. Still, reports spread rapidly. Divers described giant blocks, symmetrical formations, possible harbor systems, ancient roads extending into darkness. At one point, stories circulated about massive underwater pyramids discovered farther offshore. And this is where things become beautifully chaotic, because the alleged pyramids kept changing size depending on who described them. Some were modest. Others were supposedly larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza, which raises difficult questions. Mostly, how exactly would nobody notice giant underwater pyramids larger than Egypt for centuries? But Atlantis discussions rarely slow down for practical concerns. Now, alongside these theories came treasure hunters. And treasure hunters are one of history's most reliable categories of human being. You can place treasure hunters into almost any century, and they behave exactly the same way. Gold fever, wild confidence, questionable maps, sunburns, the unshakable belief that riches are approximately 30 feet away at all times. The Caribbean already possessed a long history of treasure legends thanks to pirates, shipwrecks, colonial trade routes, and centuries of maritime disaster. Adding Atlantis to the mix was like pouring gasoline directly onto an already burning historical campfire. Suddenly, Bimini became connected not only to lost civilizations, but also to hidden artifacts, ancient technology, and unimaginable wealth. Because apparently Atlantis could never just sink quietly. No, it also needed treasure vaults. Some expeditions genuinely searched for evidence with careful methodology. Others appeared to operate almost entirely on vibes. A boat would head into open water carrying diving equipment, maps covered in circles, and at least one man named Richard who insisted he had received guidance through dreams. And somehow these expeditions kept happening. Now, one fascinating thing about Atlantis culture is how often it reflects the anxieties of its own era. In the Cold War years, Atlantis was frequently imagined as technologically advanced. Energy beams, crystal power, lost science. People projected modern fears and hopes backward into ancient mythology. Anxious about nuclear destruction, Atlantis became a warning about advanced civilizations destroying themselves. Interested in spirituality, Atlantis became enlightened and mystical. Obsessed with extraterrestrials, Atlantis became alien-assisted. Atlantis functions like a giant historical mood ring. And during the late 20th century, people were deeply interested in hidden powers and forgotten knowledge. This was also the golden age of Bermuda Triangle fascination. Another wonderfully sleepy mystery. Books claimed ships vanished mysteriously. Aircraft disappeared. Strange magnetic anomalies haunted the seas. Most incidents eventually had practical explanations involving storms, navigation errors, mechanical failure, or ordinary ocean danger. But practical explanations struggled terribly against dramatic narration. The compass malfunction during severe weather simply lacks cinematic power. People want portals, energy fields, ancient curses, preferably all at once. And because Bimini sat near the broader Bermuda Triangle region, the legends merged beautifully together into one giant tropical conspiracy smoothie. Soon Atlantis theorists discussed magnetic forces beneath the ocean floor, psychic energy, time distortions,
Crystal technology.
There was truly no historical situation that could not become more complicated through the addition of crystals. Now, let's float gently toward one of the strangest recurring themes in Atlantis mythology. The belief that ancient civilizations were somehow spiritually superior to modern humanity. This idea appears constantly. Atlantis gets portrayed as wise, harmonious, enlightened, which is fascinating because Plato's original story specifically described Atlantis becoming corrupt and arrogant before its destruction. Humanity somehow read a cautionary tale and converted it into spiritual real estate marketing. Still, many people found comfort in imagining a forgotten golden age. Perhaps because modern life often feels fragmented and noisy. Atlantis offers the fantasy that somewhere in the distant past, humans possessed deeper wisdom before everything became emails and parking fees. And honestly, that emotional longing is very understandable, even if the evidence remains extremely underwater. Now, during all these expeditions, actual marine archaeology continued progressing carefully and quietly. Researchers studied sea levels, sediment layers, coral growth, and limestone formations. Geological evidence kept pointing toward natural processes. Beach rock formations were already known throughout the Bahamas. Similar formations existed elsewhere in the region. Natural fracturing patterns explained much of the block-like appearance. But the human imagination remained stubbornly enthusiastic. Because geology describes mechanisms, Atlantis describes dreams. And dreams are emotionally louder. One diver claimed he found polished stones suggesting human construction. Another reported strange alignments corresponding to celestial events. A third believed hidden chambers existed beneath the visible structures. And every new claim produced fresh waves of excitement. Television producers absolutely feasted on this material. Documentaries became increasingly dramatic over time. Music swelled ominously while divers illuminated rocks with flashlights as though expecting Poseidon himself to emerge from behind a coral reef. Everything underwater immediately becomes cinematic. Even ordinary seaweed gains emotional importance when filmed slowly enough. And Bimini possessed visual magic. The water there is stunningly clear. Sunlight filters downward in shimmering patterns. The stones themselves look ancient even if naturally formed. It creates the perfect environment for projection. You drift above those blocks and suddenly anything feels possible. Especially after 3 days listening to Atlantis lectures in a humid conference room. Now, among the more unusual theories was the idea that the Bimini Road functioned as part of an ancient energy grid connecting sacred sites across the planet. Naturally, this grid included Egypt, because all global mystery theories eventually arrive in Egypt like exhausted tourists. According to these ideas, ancient civilizations supposedly understood Earth energies, planetary alignments, and cosmic vibrations. Unfortunately, explanations of how any of this actually worked usually became very vague very quickly. A remarkable number of Atlantis theories operate entirely on confident hand gestures. Still, believers remained devoted. And not all of them were irrational. Many simply felt mainstream history left too many questions unanswered. Ancient monuments genuinely are impressive. Human civilizations really did accomplish extraordinary things. Mystery exists in history. Sometimes enormous mystery. The problem comes when uncertainty becomes a vacuum eagerly filled with increasingly dramatic speculation, which humanity does constantly. Now, interestingly, the actual indigenous history of the Caribbean rarely received equal attention in Atlantis discussions. The Lucayan people, descendants of the Taino cultures, lived throughout the Bahamas before European arrival. They navigated islands expertly, built communities, developed rich cultural traditions, and then suffered catastrophic devastation following colonization. Real history again. Complicated. Human. But Atlantis stories often bypass difficult realities in favor of romantic fantasy. A lost magical civilization feels emotionally safer than confronting colonial violence and historical trauma. And history frequently works this way. People gravitate toward myths that comfort them. Now, by the late 1980s and early 1990s, scientific skepticism toward the Bimini Road had become fairly mainstream within geology and archaeology. Most experts regarded the formations as natural, yet public fascination barely weakened, which is honestly impressive. Atlantis may be one of the few historical ideas completely immune to evidence. Disprove one location? People simply move Atlantis somewhere else. The Mediterranean, the Caribbean, Antarctica,
Spain,
Indonesia. At this rate, Atlantis will eventually be discovered inside a shopping mall parking garage. And believers will still say the government covered it up. But Bimini remained special. Because unlike many Atlantis claims, the stones were undeniably real, visible, photographable, touchable. Divers could descend and place their hands directly against the blocks. That physical presence gave the mystery emotional weight. You cannot touch most myths. You can touch Bimini. And perhaps that is why the legend persists so powerfully. not because the evidence conclusively proves Atlantis existed, but because the stones create a perfect doorway for imagination, a place where geology, mythology, longing, and tourism drift together beneath warm Caribbean water. And honestly, there are worse things humanity could obsess over. At least this mystery encourages snorkeling. Now, as we continue drifting deeper into the story, the theories become even stranger. Because soon researchers begin discussing ancient cataclysms, lost Ice Age civilizations, global floods, and civilizations older than conventional history supposedly allows. Which means humanity is about to become extremely confident about prehistory again. So settle further into the quiet rhythm of the waves. Imagine moonlight reflecting softly over endless, dark water. And let's continue onward into the endlessly fascinating, mildly ridiculous search for Atlantis beneath the Bahamas. By the 1990s, the Bimini Road had drifted far beyond a local mystery in the Bahamas. It was now connected to enormous theories about human civilization itself. And naturally, the theories became incredibly ambitious, incredibly fast. Because once humans start discussing lost worlds, moderation immediately leaves the conversation. Suddenly Atlantis was not just an island anymore. It became the mother civilization, the origin of science, the source of architecture, the birthplace of spiritual wisdom. At this point, Atlantis was basically carrying half the plot lines in human imagination. And the Bimini Road sat quietly underwater, while people attached increasingly dramatic meanings to it. Now, one of the biggest ideas emerging during this period involved the Ice Age. Researchers outside mainstream archaeology began suggesting that advanced civilizations might have existed before the end of the last Ice Age, more than 10,000 years ago. This concept fascinated people because it felt wonderfully rebellious. Modern civilization likes to imagine history progressing neatly upward. Cavemen gradually becoming farmers, then kingdoms, then empires, then modern society. Simple, orderly, comforting. But alternative theorists proposed something much stranger. What if civilization had already risen once before? What if an advanced culture existed during the Ice Age and vanished in a global catastrophe? What if fragments of its memory survived through myths like Atlantis? And honestly, you can see why people found this idea irresistible. It combines apocalypse, mystery, hidden wisdom, and historical drama into one giant, emotionally satisfying package. The fact that evidence remained extremely questionable rarely slowed anyone down. Now, to be fair, the end of the Ice Age really was a period of enormous environmental change. Sea levels rose dramatically as glaciers melted. Entire coastlines disappeared beneath water. Lands once inhabited became submerged forever. This part is scientifically true. Human populations absolutely lost settlements to rising seas. And because ancient coastal communities now lie underwater, archaeologists genuinely face huge gaps in the historical record, which creates room for speculation. And speculation immediately arrived, carrying 27 Atlantis books and several questionable documentaries. The Bimini Road became folded into these theories beautifully. Perhaps, some argued, the stones were remnants of an ancient coastal structure built before sea levels rose. Perhaps they belonged to a forgotten maritime culture. Perhaps mainstream archaeology underestimated ancient peoples entirely. And honestly, mainstream archaeology has occasionally been wrong before. Human history regularly surprises us. Ancient monuments, once thought impossible for certain societies, turn out to be very real. New discoveries constantly reshape historical understanding. So, alternative researchers found fertile ground here. Unfortunately, this also opened the door for absolutely everyone with a dramatic theory and access to a microphone. Now, an especially influential idea came from writers who believed ancient civilizations possessed advanced astronomical knowledge far earlier than conventional history suggested. Monuments around the world were suddenly interpreted as evidence of lost global wisdom. Pyramids aligned with stars. Ancient temples tracked celestial events. Myths described floods and destruction. Everything became connected. Humanity truly loves giant, interconnected theories. We are deeply uncomfortable with isolated facts. A random underwater rock formation feels meaningless. But connect it to Atlantis, the Ice Age, Egypt, astronomy, global floods, psychic visions, and cosmic wisdom? Now we're emotionally invested. Now, one fascinating detail about these theories is how often they reflect dissatisfaction with modern life. Atlantis stories almost always contain a sense of yearning. People imagine ancient civilizations as spiritually balanced, technologically brilliant, and deeply connected to nature. Which is interesting considering many modern people become furious after 15 seconds of weak Wi-Fi. Still, the longing is understandable. Modern existence can feel fragmented and artificial. Atlantis becomes a fantasy of lost wholeness, a dream that humanity once possessed something precious before losing it. And the Bimini Road became a physical symbol for that dream. Those underwater stones acted almost like emotional evidence. Proof that maybe, just maybe, history contained hidden chapters. Now, meanwhile, actual scientists continued researching calmly. And honestly, marine geologists deserve awards for patience. Imagine trying to explain sedimentary rock formation while standing next to a man explaining Atlantean energy crystals with complete sincerity. At some point, your soul simply leaves your body temporarily. Studies continued supporting the natural beach rock explanation. The limestone blocks matched geological processes observed elsewhere. Natural fractures could create rectangular patterns. Even the alignment itself was not impossible naturally. Nature occasionally produces formations that look suspiciously intentional. Again, rocks are constantly out here causing drama. But believers pointed toward other mysteries nearby. Additional stone formations had reportedly been discovered underwater around Bimini and neighboring areas. Some looked circular. Others resembled walls or foundations. And underwater archaeology is difficult. Visibility changes constantly. Sand shifts. Coral grows. Structures erode. It becomes surprisingly hard to determine what is natural and what might involve human activity, especially when everyone involved desperately wants Atlantis to exist. Now, around this time, television documentaries became even more dramatic. The 1990s truly perfected the art of mystical narration. A documentary would show gentle underwater footage while a narrator whispered, "Could this hidden structure rewrite human history forever?" And then immediately cut to a blurry sonar image resembling absolutely nothing. Still, audiences loved it. There is something deeply comforting about mysterious documentaries late at night, especially sleepy ones. You lie on the couch half awake, while someone with a British accent quietly suggests ancient civilizations understood cosmic forces beyond modern comprehension. And honestly, after midnight, that feels entirely reasonable. Now, another recurring feature of Atlantis theories involved ancient maps. People became obsessed with old charts supposedly showing impossible geographical knowledge. One famous example was the Piri Reis map, created in the 16th century by an Ottoman admiral. Some alternative historians claimed it depicted Antarctica before the continent was covered in ice, which would imply ancient civilizations possessed astonishing cartographic knowledge. Mainstream historians, meanwhile, interpreted the map far more cautiously and significantly less dramatically. But caution rarely wins public imagination. People prefer mystery. Mystery tastes better emotionally. And once Atlantis enters a conversation, every ancient artifact suddenly becomes suspicious. An old map? Atlantis. A flood myth? Atlantis. A strangely shaped hill? Definitely Atlantis. Humanity truly commits to themes. Now, let's drift softly toward another important detail: the role of catastrophe in human storytelling. Atlantis is fundamentally a disaster story. A civilization rises, becomes proud, then collapses beneath the sea. Humans have repeated versions of this narrative for thousands of years because it reflects deep fears about fragility. Everything can vanish. Empires fall. Cities disappear. Knowledge gets lost. And honestly, history provides plenty of real examples. The Bronze Age collapse shattered entire Mediterranean civilizations. The Roman Empire fragmented over centuries. Mayan cities declined. Ancient libraries burned. Human societies are far less permanent than they like pretending. So Atlantis resonates emotionally because it symbolizes collective anxiety, the fear that even great civilizations can disappear, possibly while behaving very arrogantly beforehand, which, historically speaking, does happen quite often. Now, one strange side effect of Atlantis obsession is that people sometimes underestimate actual ancient civilizations. Real ancient societies accomplished extraordinary things without needing psychic crystals or alien engineers. Egyptians built monumental architecture with astonishing skill. Mesoamerican civilizations developed sophisticated astronomy. Ancient navigators crossed enormous oceans. Humans are already impressive. We do not necessarily need invisible Atlanteans secretly helping everyone. But Atlantis stories persist because they transform history into mythic drama. And humans adore mythic drama, especially slow, dreamy mythic drama involving underwater ruins. Now, the Bimini Road itself remained physically unchanged throughout all this. Still underwater, still quiet, still consisting primarily of limestone blocks beneath shallow seawater. And perhaps that stability made the surrounding chaos even more amusing. For decades, scholars, mystics, tourists, and theorists projected enormous meaning onto these stones while the stones themselves simply continued existing. No revelations. No glowing inscriptions. No ancient submarine parking garage. Just rocks. Beautiful, mysterious rocks, certainly, but rocks nonetheless. And yet, there is something oddly poetic about humanity gathering around ambiguous ruins, searching for meaning. We want connection to the past. We want wonder. We want history to feel alive and unfinished. The Bimini Road offers exactly that sensation. A puzzle without closure. A mystery balanced perfectly between science and imagination. Now, by the late 1990s and early 2000s, new technologies began changing underwater exploration entirely. Improved sonar mapping, digital imaging, advanced diving equipment. Researchers could investigate underwater environments with greater precision than ever before, which meant the search for Atlantis was about to enter the modern technological age. And humanity would absolutely use expensive new equipment to continue emotionally interrogating underwater limestone. Because of course we would. So relax deeper into the quiet darkness. Imagine distant waves brushing gently against the Bahamian shore. And let's continue floating onward into the next chapter of the Bimini mystery, where science, technology, and ancient dreams continue colliding beneath the sea. As the new millennium arrived, the search for Atlantis entered a fresh and wonderfully modern phase. Humanity now possessed better technology, which meant humanity could generate more detailed arguments online. The internet changed everything. Before the internet, Atlantis enthusiasts had to attend conferences, buy books, or awkwardly corner people at parties to explain underwater civilizations. But now anyone with a keyboard and enough emotional commitment could publish theories instantly. And publish them they did. Entire websites appeared dedicated to Atlantis research. Forums filled with underwater photographs, diagrams, satellite images, timelines, and extremely confident paragraphs written entirely in capital letters. The Bimini Road became one of the internet's favorite mysteries. People zoomed into blurry images for hours searching for evidence of walls, roads, temples, and geometric perfection. Humanity truly should not be given infinite zoom capability. Now, to be fair, advances in underwater technology genuinely improved exploration. Sonar imaging became more sophisticated. Divers could map seabeds with greater precision. Underwater photography improved dramatically. Researchers gathered enormous amounts of new visual data around Bimini. And naturally, every new image produced fresh interpretations. One group would examine a sonar scan and see natural rock formations. Another would examine the exact same image and confidently identify a harbor complex built by an advanced prehistoric civilization. Human beings are incredibly talented at seeing exactly what they want to see, especially in grainy underwater footage. Now, around this time, alternative history television absolutely exploded in popularity. Cable channels discovered that audiences loved mysteries involving ancient civilizations, secret knowledge, and dramatic narration. And honestly, who can blame them? A documentary called Possible Natural Sediment Formation Near the Bahamas is simply not moving ratings. But Atlantis discovered beneath the Bermuda Triangle? Now suddenly people are canceling plans. Television producers perfected the formula. Slow underwater shots. Ominous music. A narrator speaking like he personally witnessed Atlantis sink yesterday afternoon. Then several experts offering completely contradictory interpretations while standing near maps. And somewhere in the middle, a computer-generated pyramid glows mysteriously for absolutely no scientific reason. It was beautiful television. And Bimini fit this style perfectly. The location itself already feels dreamlike. The water around the Bahamas possesses that impossible turquoise color that almost looks digitally enhanced even in real life. Sunlight moves across the ocean floor in soft, rippling patterns. Fish drift lazily above the stones. It creates an atmosphere where ancient mysteries feel emotionally plausible. Even skeptics admit the site is visually striking. Now, during these years, new theories emerged suggesting the Bimini Road might represent only a small surviving fragment of a much larger submerged landscape. Some researchers proposed that entire sections of ancient coastline remained underwater nearby. And technically, this part was not unreasonable. Sea levels absolutely changed dramatically after the Ice Age. Ancient coastlines around the world now lie underwater. Marine archaeology has uncovered submerged settlements in various places globally. Humans have always preferred living near water, which unfortunately becomes problematic when oceans decide to relocate themselves. So discussions became more nuanced. Even some mainstream researchers acknowledged that prehistoric peoples could have occupied areas now submerged near the Bahamas. But there is a very large leap between ancient coastal habitation existed and Atlantis built cosmic energy pyramids beneath the sea. Humanity performs that leap constantly. Now, one especially entertaining feature of Internet-era Atlantis culture was the emergence of amateur image analysis. People would examine underwater photographs pixel by pixel searching for hidden structures. A blurry shadow became a staircase. A coral patch became a collapsed temple. An oddly shaped rock instantly became evidence of advanced engineering. At times it resembled historical astrology. Everyone interpreting vague shapes according to personal belief. And honestly, the internet made this process dramatically more intense. Before online communities, people with highly specific Atlantis theories might never meet one another. Now they could gather digitally and reinforce increasingly elaborate interpretations together. Soon entire online ecosystems developed around lost civilizations. Atlantis forums connected with pyramid theories. Pyramid theories connected with ancient astronauts. Ancient astronauts connected with global catastrophe theories. Eventually, everyone was discussing magnetic fields and forgotten wisdom while posting low-resolution underwater screenshots. The early internet truly was a magical place. Now, meanwhile, professional archaeologists continued sounding deeply exhausted because actual archaeology requires caution. Excavation, dating methods, comparative analysis, peer review, careful interpretation, and all of these things move painfully slowly compared to, I watched 3 documentaries and now believe Atlantis controlled crystal weather satellites. History people really cannot compete with that level of enthusiasm. Still, marine scientists kept studying the Bimini formations seriously. Core samples from the stones suggested natural geological origins. Many blocks appeared to rest directly atop underlying bedrock consistent with natural beach rock processes. Fracture patterns matched known limestone behavior. From a geological perspective, the case increasingly favored natural formation. But emotionally, Atlantis remained undefeated. Now, one reason Atlantis theories survive so persistently is because the ocean itself feels mysterious. Most of Earth's oceans remain poorly explored compared to land. Vast underwater regions are still unmapped or only partially understood. Humans instinctively associate oceans with hidden worlds. And honestly, fair enough. The sea is deeply strange. Creatures glow in darkness. Ancient shipwrecks rest silently beneath waves. Entire landscapes vanish underwater for thousands of years. It is the perfect environment for myth-making. The Bimini Road benefits enormously from this atmosphere. If identical stones existed in a dry parking lot somewhere, almost nobody would emotionally collapse over them. But underwater? Everything gains mystery points automatically. Now, let's float gently toward another recurring character in this story, the wealthy enthusiast. Atlantis research has always attracted fascinating rich people. Some funded expeditions, sincerely hoping to uncover lost history. Others seemed motivated by a combination of curiosity, ego, and the desire to own a boat large enough to impress everyone at the marina. Throughout the 20th and early 21st centuries, various private expeditions searched the Bahamas using expensive equipment. Submersibles, sonar arrays, survey vessels, remote cameras, and honestly, there are worse ways for wealthy people to spend money than funding underwater archaeology-adjacent adventures. At least nobody was building another gold-plated bathroom. Some expeditions genuinely contributed useful mapping data and environmental research, even if Atlantis stubbornly refused to appear. Now, another fascinating aspect of Bimini mythology involved supposed energy anomalies. Divers occasionally reported strange sensations underwater, disorientation, emotional reactions, odd compass behavior, and once again, explanations varied dramatically. Some cited magnetic irregularities. Others blamed ocean conditions. Atlantis believers preferred ancient energy fields left behind by advanced civilizations, because naturally Atlantis needed magical ambience. But underwater environments genuinely can affect perception. Light distortion, currents, pressure changes, and sensory disorientation all influence human experience beneath the sea. Especially when someone has already spent 6 hours discussing psychic pyramids on a boat beforehand. The human brain is extremely suggestible. Now, during the 2000s, another major shift occurred in historical discussions generally. Alternative history became increasingly mainstream entertainment. Books questioning conventional timelines grew popular. Television embraced speculative archaeology. Ancient mysteries became a full entertainment genre. And honestly, part of this reflected public frustration with modern institutions. People increasingly distrusted official narratives in many areas of life. Atlantis theories fit neatly into that emotional landscape. Believing hidden truths existed beneath mainstream history became strangely satisfying. It made ordinary people feel like secret discoverers uncovering forbidden knowledge, even if the forbidden knowledge was mostly underwater limestone. Now, interestingly, many indigenous cultures around the world possess flood myths and stories about lost lands. Alternative theorists often pointed toward these traditions as evidence supporting Atlantis. But flood myths are extremely common because floods are extremely common. Human communities living near water have always experienced catastrophic flooding. Over generations, these disasters naturally become embedded in cultural memory. Real events evolve into mythic narratives, which is actually fascinating enough on its own without needing laser crystals. Still, the emotional power of these stories remained enormous. A great civilization swallowed by water. Knowledge lost beneath the waves. Survivors carrying fragments of memory into the future. It feels almost archetypal. And perhaps Atlantis survives because it taps into universal human fears about impermanence. Everything we build feels temporary eventually. Cities collapse. Empires fade. Coastlines change. Even history itself erodes. The Bimini Road becomes symbolic not necessarily because it proves Atlantis existed, but because it physically embodies uncertainty. A visible reminder that the past is never fully recoverable. Now, by the early 2010s, most mainstream scientific discussion considered the geological explanation overwhelmingly likely. The stones were probably natural beach rock fractured over time. Yet the mystery never completely vanished. Tourists still visited. Divers still explored. Documentaries still aired. And online forums continued generating theories at truly astonishing speed. Because mysteries do not survive by being solved. They survive by remaining emotionally unfinished. And the Bimini Road remains beautifully unfinished. Half geology, half mythology, half tourism brochure, which admittedly is three halves, but Atlantis math operates differently. Now, as we continue onward, the story drifts into even stranger waters. Because eventually the Bimini Road becomes tangled with modern conspiracy culture, ancient apocalypse theories, and humanity's growing fascination with civilization collapse itself, which, considering modern headlines, honestly feels very on-brand. So settle deeper into the calm rhythm of the narration. Imagine soft Caribbean currents sliding silently over ancient stones. And let's continue floating through the strange, sleepy afterlife of Atlantis beneath the Bahamas.